James, how are you?
How's it going, man?
So that's something we talk about at Beacon a lot is like, okay, what are the real killer applications in crypto? What is going to drive the value? What value can the industry create? And like time and time again, the answer of stable coins and like permissionless access to the dollar, or at least like some ways to save and maintain your purchasing power is like the prominent answer that we come to. So I don't want to ask too much of a leading question, but assuming that the people in the audience are not very familiar with reserve, what problem is reserve trying to solve, and how do you guys solve it, and what's your role with the team?
Sure. So Reserve is a permissionless platform for anyone to create stable coins, flat coins, or index products. It's all on chain. These are what we call asset-backed currencies. They could be pegged to the dollar, they could be pegged to Ethereum or Bitcoin, they could be pegged to the net asset value of a basket of assets. So someday you'll be able to build a Dragon portfolio on chain permissionlessly. Um, these asset-backed currencies, we call them RTokens. They have some cool superpowers. One of them is all the asset backing is on-chain, verifiable, and smart contracts. That's number one. Number two, revenue sharing is programmable. You could program it to go to 2 addresses or 200 addresses. It can go to the people holding the asset. It can go to the founders. It could be split up amongst them. The number three really cool trait is they all have some form of recollateralization. What that's designed for is should something in the basket have a DPEG event, that there is a fund of capital, first loss capital, to cover that loss. And it's already been stress tested. It got stress tested during the March 9th and 10th run on Silicon Valley Bank, which caused USDC and every stablecoin dependent upon it to depeg. I can get more in the weeds on how that works later if you like. Those are like some of the main superpowers of it. And yeah, I had an ecosystem for the team. A good way to think about the Reserve protocol, it's not a stable coin. It's a platform for anyone to create stable coins. So what I mean by that is think of Reserve as to stable coins and indexes and flat coins as to what Shopify is to e-commerce or what YouTube is to video broadcasting. And what's interesting about that is, kind of up till now, up till the year 2023, we're still using an industrial age paradigm for how we understand money. But when you bring digital into this money system, which is what crypto has done, you also bring things like permissionlessness and solving the double spend problem. And then you kind of make it easy for anyone to create these assets. We move away from only the government creating currencies to anyone can create anything. And the way I think about stable coins, it's like an app, right? We don't call them apps right now because we just call them stable coins. But crypto is not even adopted by more than 1% of people on the planet yet. And I remember when the App Store launched in 2008, people were like, why do we need apps? I just want to go to the website. But now there's 2 million apps in the App Store. That's what creativity unlocks. So yeah, and I don't know if I said it, I head up ecosystem. So that's biz dev community and developer relations at Reserve.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. I love the Shopify analogy, the Shopify for e-commerce, and really how Reserve's just a platform to create asset-backed tokens and stable coins and flat coins. So basically, you're talking to a lot of DeFi native people right now, but there's also this consumer or end user that you have in mind that is, maybe in need of a stable currency or access to flat coins or stable coins. How do you reach these two different users, and why focus on both? What are the synergies there between like DeFi and on-chain users and yield farmers, really, and then the other end user of people who need stable currencies?
Yeah, well, so we see the adoption curve for stable coins. There's like layers of it, and there's early adopters and there's late adopters. Um, The way we think about that stack is first the asset needs to exist. Someone's got to create the R token, and hopefully they've created something that's useful and differentiated and so forth. Then it needs to be tradable somewhere, it needs to be on a DEX. Then it needs some liquidity so that people can trade it. Then it needs, in part of that are liquidity providers, whether it's hedge funds or whales or, yield farmers. And then we get into things like wallet integrations and adoption by DAO treasuries. We get into earn programs, and then we eventually get into end user adoption, through different wallet apps. Could be a CeFi app, could be a DeFi app. In fact, Reserve, I was a seed investor in Reserve 5 years ago. And you might wonder, well, why? Because the protocol actually only launched on Ethereum mainnet about a year ago, and it launched on Base about 3 weeks ago. But so what were we up to in the prior 4 years? Well, the team was doing a lot of research and development about different stablecoin platform designs. Made a few wrong turns along the way, but corrected them and found what we think is the right path. Very early to call out algo stablecoins like Terra Luna weren't going to work. Our founder was calling that out publicly 3 years ago. But a lot of times people don't really listen until afterwards. So the one thing they also did, though, is they launched the RPay app in Latin America. It was in 18 countries, Venezuela, Argentina, Mexico, and so forth, to help people protect their they're getting paid by their employer. They want that money to still be useful a week later, not devalued thanks to the government printing money. So there are a number of uses of that around the world. A lot of people are using Tether in some countries, from what I'm hearing, like Lebanon, and also in hyperinflation areas. And that's only going to get better. Those are the people who need access to this quite a bit. It has been challenging, as you and everyone who's listening will know. The intersection of crypto with TradFi has not been well accepted in parts of the world. The United States over the last year. That's created a lot of friction for people to launch these apps and make them available to the end user. But I think PayPal USD is pretty interesting. It's really hard for startups to do this, by the way, because you've got to go get licenses and things like that. But if you already have the licenses like PayPal does, you can just drop PayPal USD on a Monday and start to build some traction there. That's exciting, to see PayPal doing it. Probably going to see Cash App do something at some point. And they'll play a role, but we hope a lot of startups will too. As you guys all know, a lot of this Web3 technology is not very mature yet. In fact, the user experiences suck in a lot of places. So there's going to be a lot of work needed over the next several years to get those user experiences to be better than Web 2. In yield farming, better doesn't need the perfect UX. It just needs good yield, as we all know. So that's why it's taken off as really a killer app of DeFi so far.
Okay, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So you've got basically this RPay app that's reaching consumers, and you've got all of these different R tokens that really anybody can permissionlessly launch. Is there like a particular R token or set of R tokens that you utilize with RPay? Do you have the option to utilize any with RPay, or is there like one in particular that's most popular? And is there an advantage of plugging into that instead of going to USDC or Tether kind of on the back end of RPay directly?
Sure, great question. By the way, I could share a screen and show a couple of slides. Would that be helpful, or people?
Yeah.
You can see that, okay? Cool. And I'll drop a link actually to what I'm showing on the screen here. The URL is reserve.org/LP. What I'm going to put on the screen here, this is kind of what I would call the most succinct fact sheet on everything that's happening with Reserve. We share it a lot with like asset managers, yield farmers, hedge funds, and so forth. But what I'm showing on the screen is an example of a few of the R tokens. So, but you honed in on something really important. What is the relationship of RPay with R tokens? And the answer is RPay is just a distribution vehicle for R tokens, just like exchanges and all kinds of other fintech apps. They wanted something decentralized and on-chain, and they're actually using this one right here called the electronic dollar. And I'll get into the weeds in that in a second. Something to say though about RPay. This year has been kind of this year of Operation Choke Point and so forth. That team is pivoting into a launch actually in the United States pretty soon. And it will have a really interesting configuration for providing full suite banking in the United States, which is what a lot of Americans would like or prefer, but using our tokens for sending money to their friends and family internationally. It's a pretty interesting and nuanced way that they're approaching it. But right now, the electronic dollar is in the RPay app. And what makes the electronic dollar interesting is it's got a lot of over collateralization for it. It's designed to be resilient in like black swan events. And ironically, it launched on February 23rd. 2 weeks later, on March 10th, half of the basket had depegged. But while every other stablecoin that depended upon USDC needed to wait for either A, the regulators to backstop, which they did on Sunday night in the United States, and B, the banks to actually reopen on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of that week. It took them several days to get back to peg. Electronic dollar, the way it works and the way all our tokens work, is they have parameters that sense the depeg event. And so what it does is, and you can see here in the basket, it's 50% Tether, 50% USDC. These are compound and Aave yield-bearing versions of those. The R token, electronic dollar, it senses the depeg event. It takes the failing collateral, which was USDC in this case. It immediately sells it off to the market, and it buys a backup collateral. It also slashes the stakers, the first loss capital pool, because there's going to be a deficit, and the money's got to come from somewhere. We're not printing money. It's that's what these funds are for. It did all of this by breakfast time on Sunday morning. Returned back to its peg, went through the sell off the failing collateral, slash the stakers, and buy a backup collateral. And there's a number of pre-programmed backup collaterals. There's no governance happening in that moment. These parameters are set up when the token is deployed, and they can be changed by governance, but you would never want to do that during a black swan situation. That's how electronic dollar works. That's available in the RPay app. That one was actually launched by MobileCoin. So, you might wonder who can launch our tokens, who would want to. The answer is protocols and apps and entrepreneurs. Could also be hedge funds and TradFi institutions. And someday it's going to be governments and metaverses and video games. All of those groups I just mentioned are using different types of currencies. We tend to think they're going to want stable and asset-backed currencies. And, fortunately, the Reserve Protocol is free to use. So hopefully they'll give it a swing. That's how electronic dollar works. Let me just give you two quick examples here. ETH Plus, the one I have here in the middle, this is just an LST index. It's currently half Rocket Pool ETH, half Lido staked ETH. It's probably going to get a couple of new assets added to the basket, so more diversification. And you might wonder, well, why does anyone want ETH Plus? What's the plus for? The plus is for diversification, and it has a little bit of over collateralization as well. LSTs, I don't think have depegged since Shanghai, but Lido staked ETH had depegged several times before that. Yeah, that, for folks that want a diversification component to it, plus they're getting the yield on this is around 3.8% right now, 3.8 to 4. But in the future, you might have some collaterals that bring enhanced yields to it. So you potentially might have an LST index that might have some even better yield. That's kind of cool. High yield USD here is a flat coin. It's a DeFi savings account flat coin. It was launched by an anon in the community. You can kind of see what's in the basket there. It's using an LP token for EUSD's Frax base pool. It's using Tether on Morpho. It's using SDAI on Maker, and it's using USDC on Flux. And it's paying, I think right now, around, it changes every day, but about 5.5% on chain, sometimes more than 6. That's how high USD works. So, that's just like a few of the RTokens. I'd say keep an eye on USDC Plus. Look out for the alpha. You're going to see more news on that pretty soon. What is USDC Plus? It's USDC plus 2 things that USDC does not offer. Number 1, yield to holders, and number 2, some over collateralization, the first loss capital pool. It won't be for everybody, but for people who want USDC and they want yield, they might be into it. All of these are decentralized. They're governed by the community. We don't control them. That's the funny thing about RTokens. They're decentralized, which is good news and bad news. It's good news because it's decentralized. Like, this is why we're all here. It's kind of bad news because it's decentralized and we don't have the strings to pull. It has to be done through governance.
Yeah, wow, that's awesome. And I would love to get into the specific opportunities for increased yield on each one of these RTokens and maybe some specific pools. But like, before we get into that, I just wanted to circle back to RPay for a second. So RPay is integrated with all of these, or with just EUSD for now? And then are users on RPay able to capture this native yield of some of these strategies built into the RTokens?
Yeah, good question. So right now, only EUSD. RPay is a centralized business. It's like PayPal for Latin America and soon the United States. So they make choices about which tokens to host in the wallet or not. It's hosting electronic dollar. It's not hosting any of the other RTokens, but that could be the case in the future. Electronic dollar, its design is it takes actually 100% of its yield and gives it to the stakers who provide first loss capital. So the people that are using RPay in Latin America, they're not there for getting access to DeFi yield or getting access to LSCs, at least not yet. They're in it for making sure they're not using the Argentinian peso or the Venezuelan bolivar that could, debase overnight, literally. They want to be able to get paid by their employer, buy groceries, send money to friends. So that's why they're using electronic dollar. But as that app grows in popularity and it's the next version of that app, as most of us here on the call know, these financial products are growing exponentially in terms of number of tokens and number of variants. And there's going to be a lot of opportunity for people to experiment with. Just like, right now in your MetaMask, you can go and, access tens of thousands of different tokens. But yeah, that's the answer on RPay. It's kind of much more placed in the TradFi world than in the DeFi world.
Yeah, and I know that it might be somewhat of a touchy subject for now because it's like a design decision, right? Like, what do you do for this consumer facing app? Do you make it, a Web3 or crypto native app where it's a DeFi application and people have to worry about private keys and, smart contract approvals? Or do you make it a Web2 app and then you get a lot more usability and you're actually able to onboard people? So I think that design decision makes a lot of sense in this context. You talked about the first loss capital pool and first loss capital, and then the revenue sources being different or the revenue receivers, I suppose, being different for each one of these different pools. Can you just, for the audience, people who might not know exactly what you mean when you say first loss capital, can you explain what that is and then how the different RTokens, or at least the main ones, are approaching incentivizing that first loss capital pool?
Yeah, will do. So what I'm putting on the screen, you should see an app on the screen called Register, hopefully if I'm doing it correctly. Register.app is what we call the token explorer for the Reserve Protocol ecosystem. It's operated by a third party. It's a front end. you know, today there's one front end, or you can just interact with the smart contracts directly. But in the future, there might be 5 or 10 or 50 front ends, you know, fingers crossed. We hope that's what happens. But what you can do is you can get in here and you can start to compare our tokens by market cap, by volume, and so forth. Let me talk about your specific answer to your question here. So I'm going to start with actually this high yield USD. This is the one that is the DeFi savings flat coin. And one thing you can do is go and look at what are the revenue share percentages. Who's getting the yield on this? And in this case, you can see 81% of the yield is going to the holders of high yield USD, so the majority of the revenue. And you can see 16% goes to the stakers. And what you can also notice here is if you're looking at me on screen, you can see that the basket is 100% fully backed, but it's also got 11% over collateralization as of today. That's what drives it, is the amount of money that goes to the stakers, you get more over collateralization. I'll show you an alternative version of this when we look at electronic dollar in a minute. And then you can also see there's 3% going to this external address. This is going to the person who's working on growing this particular R token. These revenue distribution parameters can be changed at any time by governance. So, you know, if someone in the audience is a growth marketer or is a partnerships person and they want to bring value and say, look, I want to be a part of the revenue split and here's how I'm going to help. That could just be a governance proposal. And if it passes, they'd essentially be revenue sharing and hopefully co-contributing to the growth of high yield USD. I'll switch over to a different R token and show you something that's very different. This is the electronic dollar, EUSD. And a couple of things you'll notice right out of the gate is that 100% of the revenue goes to the stakers. And you'll also notice that EUSD is now 54% over collateralized. It's pretty heavily over collateralized. When back on March 9th and 10th, when the USDC DPEG happened, I think it was only about 30% over collateralized, but it performed really well. You know, you don't really need 30 or 50% unless, you know, a significant portion of the basket goes to zero. Which, you know, if it were Terra Luna in the basket, you would be at that risk. You know, these days, when you have kind of more blue chip assets like USDC, I don't think any of us expect them to go to zero. They could, you know, have a DPEG event, but it's usually like 5 or 10%, not 100%. That being said, that's the cool thing about our tokens, and that's why diversification matters. The more diversified the basket, the least amount of surface area that's at risk of going to zero. And so right now you're looking at a basket with 4 assets in the basket, but in the future you might see a basket with 40 different assets, all kinds of crypto assets, real world assets, and so forth. I think that world is coming in the next few years. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, maybe I could just show you one more. I'll show
Yeah.
you the basket in USDC Plus here. As you can see, USDC Plus is sending 10% of its yield to the stakers. They're currently providing about 6% over collateralization. 80% goes to the holders. And then the folks that launch this, you'll hear more about them. And this community will be very interested in who the group is. So stay tuned. It should be, I think they'll announce it sometime this month, probably towards the end of the month. They're taking the 10% and they're reinvesting into incentives in the Curve ecosystem to really drive growth of the asset.
Wow. Is it Coinbase? Is it Circle?
I'll say this, they're DeFi natives, which is cool.
Okay.
You
Wow.
know, they would be in good company if we had them on the call. But yeah, I think they'll probably announce it soon. There's probably some alpha out there leaking around in a few discords, but yeah, keep an eye on this one.
Wow, we really appreciate that alpha drop. That's super cool. So basically, RSR token holders can choose which R token they want to stake their RSR to. And they would do that based on looking, okay, this is the revenue split. This is how I think that R token is growing and what the TVL of that R token is. So this is the yield I'm going to get. But also, what is the composition of that R token? And how do I view the risks? So what's my risk of potentially being that first lost capital and getting slashed because I am essentially the over collateralizing party as the R token holder. So you're getting the yield or your share of the revenue split. And then the risk is that, well, you have token directional exposure to the RSR token and also the risk of being slashed if there is a DPEG event, basically.
Yeah, you bring up a really important point. So as you can imagine, when EUSD launched on February 23rd, and then there's a black swan event, bank run 2 weeks later, that's not exactly what any protocol would want. Or the people that are the stakers in the first lost capital pool. That kind of sounds like it sucks. But a different way to look at it is the protocol worked, which is cool, right? A lot of times, there's a bunch of protocols out there and white papers and promises. Hey, here's how we think it's going to work. Here's my promise to you. But, what's that worth? What we really need is actual stress tests. We need actual black swan events. So we got that. Good news for the stakers. So this is where you look at the yield if you're a staker. By the way, who are the stakers? Stakers are holding the RSR governance token. That's the governance token for the Reserve Protocol. What they're doing is they're helping make the market. They're helping pick winners and losers. They want to find R tokens to stake on so they get some yield, and they don't want to stake on bad ones so they lose their money. What happened in particular with EUSD, because the yields were so high, right now it's only paying the stakers 5%, but I think it was paying like 20% most of this year. So the people that got slashed, they got 2% slashed during that event. They were already back in the black, I think, in August of this year because the yields were so high. So they, recovered pretty quickly, which is, kind of a neat story. I'll just show kind of the yield here for the stakers on USDC Plus. So the stakers that are choosing to stake on this one, they're getting about 10% right now. Of course, all this fluctuates with kind of supply and demand and how it works. Yeah.
Wow. Very interesting. And I'd like to point out for anybody listening that DPEG event of USDC, sometimes you hear regulators say that the crypto industry poses an existential risk to the financial system. That was actually an example of the financial system posing a risk to the crypto economy and to USDC specifically, because the source of that temporary USDC DPEG was a bank run on a under collateralized banking institution, right? So I just wanted to point that out for everybody. Okay, so that RSR token, that RSR staking yield that they're receiving, is that paid out in that specific R token? How is that claimable, and what does that payout look like?
Yeah, great question. So for the folks that are holding the R tokens, that are using the R tokens, they're earning the yield in the more R tokens. So if you're an ETH Plus holder, getting more ETH Plus. There's a fully on-chain protocol operations that's taking that yield. It's using it to buy more of the underlying collateral. Specifically, the way it works is if you're holding, you bought $100 of high yield USD. What's happening behind the scenes is after a year, let's just say the yield was 5%, the protocol takes that 5%. And sells it off and buys more of the R token. And then it melts the R token, it burns the R token. So the people who put $100 in, now there's still 100 high USDs out there, except each high USD is worth $1.05. So that's how they're getting their yield in high USD. For RSR stakers, they're getting more RSR. That's how it's paid out. And I think I don't know the exact frequency of when RSR drips to the stakers. I do know it wants to be kind of a material threshold, because gas on Ethereum is not great. You don't want to waste your money on that. But whenever there's a meaningful threshold of RSR to be claimed, that drips to the stakers. That's how it works.
Okay, very cool. And I'd like to also point out to everybody that that methodology of distributing the yield to the R token holders of like a buyback and burn instead of a buyback and distribute. You know, I'm not a tax professional, I'm not a tax advisor, but that is in many jurisdictions seen as like a more tax efficient way to distribute yield, sort of like holding WST ETH or RETH instead of like running your own staking node and then receiving periodically those staking rewards as like taxable income or whatever. So that's a cool approach. I really like that. This might seem like a silly question, but so if RPay is kind of like a Web2 app and it's plugging into just EUSD right now, then like why do you need deep liquidity for EUSD on chain? And really, why do you need deep liquidity for the other R tokens as well on chain? Like, is that fitting into the long-term vision, or what's the strategy there?
Awesome question, man. Yeah, you're actually tuning into something really interesting and nuanced about RPay when it launched. Let me fix my camera a little bit. So the short answer is this deep liquidity enables lots of other use cases and applications far beyond RPay. In fact, when RPay launched, it used a predecessor to electronic dollar that was a fully centralized but asset-backed stablecoin. It was called RSV, the reserve dollar. It's been deprecated now. And most of the transactions were off-chain, because doing on-chain transactions for $7 transactions it will eat you alive on the gas fees. So they actually did most of the volume on centralized servers. They did over $5 billion of volume since year 2020. So over 3.5 years. That's how it launched. But interestingly enough, they were using RSV during the Black Swan event when there was a run on Silicon Valley Bank. And 1 week later, they switched to electronic dollar. Because at that particular moment, RSV historically had been backed by the Paxos dollar, USDC, and maybe some true USD. And it had changed over time. At one point, it had Binance USD, but then that became problematic. But yeah, as soon as they kind of saw the resilience of the electronic dollar, they just adopted EUSD that next week. And so to answer your question, they don't necessarily need DeFi liquidity on Curve to do what they need to do. But the DeFi liquidity on Curve allows lots of other use cases and applications. You know, I kind of mentioned these layers of stacked layers of different uses. Obviously, yield farmers, liquidity providers, they want to be able to get in and out of the asset pretty quickly. You can also build R tokens that have other R tokens in the basket, right? And so you want liquidity, you want people to be able to get in and out of these assets. Now, all the R tokens are minting and redemptions are permissionless, they're on chain. So you can always do that no matter how much, there could be no liquidity in the market, you can still redeem. Now, the question is, well, if you're redeeming for Lido staked ETH, can you trade it for somewhere? Which, you know, that's a big popular asset. So hopefully you can. But yeah, you know, kind of our path with liquidity and TVL. The other thing we're learning a lot about is different applications and different customers in the future have a minimum viable Lindy effect that they need to see before they're ready, right? Years of sustainable working, right? That's how we believe, this thing's here to stay. And I can tell you, in 2018, I've been in crypto for 10 years. There were a lot of people, you know how these narratives kind of come and go and naysayers and all that. people in 2017, 2018, there was a considerable group of people that said, oh, Bitcoin's going to get hacked. The government's going to shut it down, blah, blah, blah. They're not saying that anymore. There's an ETF that's about to launch by all the biggest banks, 10 of them. We're beyond, people have finally accepted Bitcoin's here to stay, and it's going to be a part of the future. People generally think that about Tether and USDC, although obviously the USDC Black Swan event this year made us all kind of recalibrate our expectations. But as these assets are around longer periods of time and they achieve significant TVL, they become less risky and more useful for lots of folks out there. So that's what we're doing, is trying to reach those minimum thresholds of TVL, help the community reach them, actually, whether it's yield farmers that are doing something with it, or a exchange that wants to do something with it, or someone has a new use case for the asset that they want to apply. They all want to see meaningful TVL. They want to see Lindy effect. And that's kind of, we're in the beginning rounds of that. Right now, the overall TVL in the reserve ecosystem is only about $33-34 million, up from zero in February. But it's growing inch by inch, day by day, and excited to see what people want to do next. In fact, I just saw today, I saw some integration on Beefy Finance that I didn't even know about. This is the cool thing about permissionless composability. So that was cool. Saw some other activity this week, some other integrations. So those are all super exciting to see what people do with it.
Awesome. Yeah, I want to be mindful of our time because I really want to get to the specific like yield farming opportunities on some of these RTokens that exist on, places like Curve and Convex and Yearn and maybe some auto compounders and that sort of thing. You mentioned, helping the community and different RTokens reach, TVL and get some TVL in there to start building the Lindy effect. I noticed that it might have been a few months ago that Reserve bought some Curve ecosystem assets. So are you guys incentivizing all of these RTokens with your CVX and CRV? Is there like a governance process for picking some? And then, I don't know, maybe if you want to pull up some of the best yielding opportunities, I've been having my eye on like the ETH plus ETH Curve pool, and I saw there was like a high yield EUSD Curve pool. So yeah, if you want to get into the incentivization process and then how that's shaking out with current opportunities on chain, on mainnet, and maybe base as well.
Yeah, I'll show both. Let me cover that incentivization process first. Then I'm going to show you some dashboards, and then I'll show you a Twitter account that publishes an update every week. As you mentioned, we've invested about $20 million this year into the Curve ecosystem across StakeDAO, CVX, and CRV. And the intention of that is so that we can create robust liquidity for these RTokens, help them get some initial traction, get some support. Now, as I understand it, there's over 1,000 RTokens that have now been created. Once we launched on Base, there were like 1,000 RTokens created on Base in a weekend, because the gas is zero. And of course, these are a lot of people just experimenting. They're not actually launching a stable coin. So, how are we going to support them all? Well, we won't be able to support them all. What we'll have to do is do our best to, we have a DeFi strategy ourselves, which really is what kind of is the leading tip of the spear and how we, direct incentives. But, what we see, typically when we see an RToken launch, what we like to encourage the people launching it to do is to build community, to build differentiation, to have a go-to-market plan. Some have that, some do not have that. This is how people think about where to put their capital. They want to invest in teams that they believe in. They want to invest in missions that they care about. They don't want to invest in someone's brilliant idea that has no support from anyone. So this is, and this is what we all see in crypto. You got to build community. You got to build supporters. And so that's up to the people launching these RTokens. The ones that get the more community support get more support. And by the way, I'm seeing the same thing because we're trying to do things with other large DeFi protocols. And it's like their message is pretty clear. Go get community support, and then we'll support it. That's how DeFi is supposed to work. So these dashboards are linked from reserve.org/LP if you want to go look at the dashboards yourself. I won't get into the weeds too much, but I want to just kind of home in on a few important dashboards here. Hopefully it's not too small on my screen. But these 4 dashboards that you're looking at, and actually I'm going to show you an abstracted, easier version of it in a second. Actually, what I'll say is these are here and you're welcome to use them and go and play with the data. I'm actually going to put something on screen though that's a little bit easier to navigate, which is a tweet that we put out every week. Do you see Twitter on your screen now?
I do. Perfect.
Okay, awesome. So this is the RToken yield update that I'm putting on the screen right now. And let's see if this should be able to click on this, oddly enough. For some reason, I'm not able to click on it, but you can see it. We put out the yield update every week of where the most interesting yields across Yearn, Finance, Stake DAO, Curve, Convex, probably add Beefy next week. There's right now you only see 3 main RTokens on here. You'll probably see USDC Plus get added in the next few weeks, and it'll probably look pretty exciting. So keep an eye on that. And what you've got here is you've got the TVL on each of the assets. You've got the native APY for holding the assets. And then the LP APY on those particular pools at the moment that we do the snapshot. Usually we'll obviously include what we think is the biggest one. There's some smaller ones. The yields might be a little lower on Curve, but if you're a Curve person and not a Yearn person, then to each his own. And then of course the staking APY. But yeah, we put out this yield update every week. Now high yield USD has just launched on Base as well. And you can see in this yield update, this is Ethereum only so far, but in the next few weeks, you're going to see an Ethereum version and a Base version of that. And so high yield USD has launched on Base. There's a Curve pool that's live right now, I noticed. And I see some folks in the community talking about, yield and win, and I suspect that's probably soon. So as soon as we see it, we'll report on it here. That should be pretty interesting for, we're really excited to see DeFi blossom on Base. So yeah, I think that'll be 2 big changes to the yield update is high USD on Base coming, and then USDC Plus on Ethereum also. ETH Plus, by the way, is a really interesting one for all of us who love Ethereum here, because you can just stack more ETH and you get this diversification underneath. I did see yesterday OKX launched an ETH Plus integration, exciting, and then of course the stuff we saw. I think I saw Exponential DeFi launch some interesting pools with ETH Plus earlier this week. So yeah, we're excited to see what else happens with ETH Plus. I think it's probably one of my favorite RTokens, to be honest.
Yeah, that's awesome. I definitely can go down the rabbit hole and look at all these yields across the different chains. I'm looking at Base right now, and there's an EUSD CRV USD pool as well. That is a pretty crazy yield. So yeah, there's, I'm sure, a lot of farming opportunities. Can you walk me through a little bit of the decision process for Base being the first L2 to deploy on? I mean, we saw Arbitrum growing throughout 2022, and it was very tempting, I'm sure, for a lot of protocols to pull trigger on that then, and then prepare for this bull market. But then with Coinbase getting involved in the OP stack and building with alongside Optimism, that's very exciting. And I'm talking to a lot of builders who are interested in deploying on Base or who are deploying on Base. even though there's not necessarily promises of incentives or that sort of thing. So walk me through a little bit of that decision-making process if you can.
Yeah. Yeah. Coinbase and Base have something that no other chain has. They have 100 million users. And my understanding is that 10 million of them are already using Coinbase Quest program. There's Base is growing fast, as we've seen, ups and downs, of course, as always. But I think the combination of the optimism stack and the Coinbase network effects presents a really interesting opportunity for DeFi, a really interesting growth opportunity. And I think that was a big part of the calculus for us. I think another part too is Coinbase, their 100 million customers are KYC, which and they have, they can send them an email. We can't do that in DeFi. We're all here, trying to use debank messaging and block scan messaging, or, find people on Twitter. It's not very efficient, to be honest. I'd actually love to meet anyone in the community, by the way, that's got this egg cracked. If you figured out messaging in Web3 to be able to connect with people who have different wallets, I'd love to hear about it. There's a huge gap between the promise of this, hey, just go send a message on DBank, but a lot of people don't respond to those. So I think Coinbase is probably going to really drive some innovation in that area. I believe I heard that they're integrating XMTP messaging into their wallet app, and you'll be able to message people throughout the Base ecosystem. That's pretty exciting. Whether they do it or someone else really solves that, I hope there'll be 10 or 20 competitors, but it's much needed. And I have a feeling that Coinbase will play a material role in that type of capability. But those are like a few of the main reasons that are pretty exciting to us.
Yeah, network effects beget more network effects, and getting jump started with 100 million users is a pretty decent argument for being the place to be, even if you're not throwing incentive money around necessarily right out the gate.
That's right. Who knows? Maybe they'll throw money later. Maybe there'll be innovation funds. I mean, it's pretty common for platforms, that are successful to create innovation funds to grow their ecosystems. Long before crypto, YouTube did this to bootstrap their entire ecosystem of creators. Facebook has done it. Amazon's done it.
Uber as well.
So which one?
Uber, I think they gave you $5 or $10 to refer a friend. Yeah.
Right. That's what PayPal really invented it, I think. Get $10 and give $10 to a friend. And then, of course, we see that happening with a lot of crypto ecosystems now. So who knows, what the future will entail with Base. It's good that all of these ecosystems are competing with each other to really bring the best solution to market in terms of how to grow their ecosystems, because the playbook changes every year. We're at such a young age at this point.
Awesome. And before we sign off and maybe give you the opportunity to plug some socials or whatever you want to plug, as far as the adoption of the RPay app, how is that going? Are there challenges? Are there headwinds? Are there tailwinds? I know y'all have a boots on the ground kind of presence in South America. Hopefully I get the chance to meet some people down there from the reserve team as well in the coming months. What's that process like, especially after UST and maybe the perception of stable coins? Tron is a very popular network. UST gained a lot of adoption. It's been kind of a rocky road for the security side of stable coins. Is that a headwind you're working against as well?
Yeah, we've been public about it. You've all heard of something called Operation Choke Point, which essentially severed many banks' abilities to be able to work with a crypto affiliated company. The RPay team, though, did something really interesting. And the U.S. government's kind of a big entity, but they got an OFAC license to operate in Venezuela. It was announced earlier this year, which is a pretty huge accomplishment. I don't even think PayPal has it. So that's great. It's like, wow, the OFAC license is a pretty big deal. But at about the same time, the other leg of the government is doing kind of Operation Choke Point, cutting off banks. This USDC DPEG, essentially, I don't know for sure, but it kind of looks like to me someone had an intention to cut off Silicon Valley Bank, and Signature Bank and the other banks. It happened to more than one. So that's made operating a CeFi type of business affiliated with crypto, if you're a startup, very difficult this year. And put a lot of startups out of business, in fact. But that could change in the future. I think as there's a lot of kind of politics that drive some of this, political regimes, and that might change next year. Fingers crossed. But it's for sure a headwind. That being said, for all of us here in DeFi, so that and actually the RPay team, they have a very interesting strategy for how to address it and to be fully regulatory compliant, right? They never have broke the law. They're not going to in the future. They're just navigating it, just like every startup's got to navigate the challenge, whatever the challenge of the day is. So they'll get through it. But of course, for most of the use cases, things that are exciting about RTokens and what we've been talking about on this call, you don't really need to be a CeFi app. There's plenty of use cases in DeFi, and there might be more people coming into DeFi. I keep hearing this. Some big news events coming up, some adoption by institutions, and so there might be a world where we can be truly DeFi native, even in our applications on our phones or whatever other devices we might be using. And that's, I think, really exciting. We say it a lot, and I think we mean it, but I'll say it one more time. Hopefully we're creating a completely new paradigm for how the world works, where your keys, your money, and you can access the financial system no matter where you live, no matter what your income is. And so a lot of people that are building in DeFi, that's what they're working on. And I believe they will solve it. It's clunky and it's not that convenient right now, but it's going to improve considerably. I can tell you war stories about the internet in the 90s and how much it sucked, and how much it's improved, obviously, since then. We all know it. We can't live without it at this point.
Absolutely. That's the vision. That's the gold standard, the new paradigm, and being truly DeFi native, holding your own keys and owning your own money. It's going to take a while for everybody to get there, and we might need to build some bridges along the way. But that's the vision, and I think you articulated it really, really well. I want to give you the opportunity. Is there a Twitter account or a particular shout out you want to give to direct our users to continue to learn more and support you and support Reserve?
Yeah, thanks so much, Jangle. You can find me on Twitter at 0xJMG. 0xJMG. Find me on Twitter, DM's open, hit me up. Especially if you've have solutions on the messaging and Web3 problem, or if you want to talk about launching RTokens or whatever. Also encourage you to follow at Reserve Protocol on Twitter. Everything gets published there. And if you want to really roll your sleeves up and dive in, just drop into the Reserve Discord. There's a link tree on the Reserve Twitter account. Go into the link tree, you'll find the Discord link, drop into the Discord. We're there working with our token deployers to get launched and grow. And if folks in this community want to launch RTokens and they want to get support, whether it's co-marketing or curve incentives, we want to help you with that. So definitely hit me up in the DMs or drop into the Discord, and we'll try to be helpful to you on whatever your mission is.
Okay. Wow. Well, thanks so much for coming, James. This has been a really awesome session. I'll definitely be reaching out about, maybe meeting some of the team in South America and keeping an eye on reserve. And for everybody watching, I'll be doing follow-ups with some of the yield opportunities that exist on chain for RTokens and those sorts of assets. And yeah, thanks so much for coming. This was an awesome talk. I hope you have a great weekend. And if you ever want to talk DeFi or reach out or do something like this again, my Twitter DMs are open as well. So yeah, it was great talking to you.
Awesome. Thanks everybody. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, James.